Today's speaker, Steve Berry, is a member of Mercer Law School's class of 1980, and he's truly one of our most gifted and versatile graduates. He practiced law for 30 years, actually up to just a couple of years ago. During that time, he was active in local politics, served on the County Board of Education, County Board of Commissioners. 10 years after he graduated from law school, he began writing. He was always fascinated by history, and he began writing international suspense thrillers. It took him 12 years and 85 rejections before a publisher bought one of his book manuscripts. That remarkable perseverance paid off. His first two books became national bestsellers, and later books have consistently and even more quickly climbed to the top of bestseller lists. He has more than 14 million books in print, translated into 40 languages, and sold in 51 countries. He and his wife Elizabeth have founded History Matters, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping communities in historic preservation. Please welcome the law school commencement speaker for 2013, Steve Berry.
Thank you, Dean and Dr. Davis, family and friends, and the graduates. 33 years ago, right about now, I was sitting out there where you are, thinking exactly probably what most of you are thinking right now. Wow, glad that's over, isn't it? You know, most of you probably are thinking that. What else could be going through your mind? You know, things like that was 3 tough years, and they said on orientation day it was going to be hard, and they were right, but I made it. I'm here. I graduated with a law degree. I did it. Now what do I do? It's a good question. I asked myself that same thing on graduation day, sitting out there. And in preparing for today's talk, I scanned the internet, and amazingly, there are a whole bunch of commencement addresses posted on the internet, delivered by all sorts of people. It's actually quite amazing how many there are. And as a published writer, I've spoken to audiences all over the world, and I normally never read from a script, but today I'm a little extra nervous. So I did something that I've never done before. I actually wrote everything down to try to make sure that I got it right. It was hard to compose these words. I normally write about 1,000 words a day, try to get around 25 or 30,000 a month. This speech took me about 3 months to write, and it's only about 2,400 words. It was difficult to come to a conclusion what to say, but in the end I decided to say what I wish had been told to me when I had sat out there 33 years ago. Before the battles begun, before the mistakes were made, before I actually became a lawyer. Hindsight is truly wonderful. It's kind of hard to mess up when you're in that point of view. And standing here today with the benefit of hindsight, I actually know some of the things I wish I had been told in 1980. And that's what I'm going to share with you. Some of you here today, when you leave here, are going to work for law firms, big or small. Others will venture into the business world, working either for yourself or another entity. A few will choose public service, and even fewer will do nothing, content with your degree, patient with what might ultimately come of it. Then there are those of you who will do what I did. You'll hang out a shingle, you'll unlock the front door, and you see what walks in. There's a name for us. They're called street lawyers. And John Grisham even wrote a novel with that title. I was a street lawyer for 30 years. I did a bit of everything: wills, contracts, corporations, landlord, tenant, but mostly my work was in the courthouse. Thousands of divorces, hundreds of criminal defense cases, personal injury, contracts disputes, you name it. You needed someone in the courtroom, there's where I was. Being a street lawyer brings a challenge every day because you truly have no idea what's going to walk through the door. Of course, you need clients because you have to pay the bills. No clients, no fees, no practice. It's a harsh reality, but it's nonetheless a reality. 6 weeks after I left Macon, Georgia, I was standing in front of my first jury. Now, in the late 1970s, the concept of teaching trial practice in law school was in its infancy. To that point, it had really never been done. Today, it just makes sense. Teach a person who wants to try cases what they need to know to try them. I recall when the first trial practice courses were taught at this school. I took a couple, but as you might imagine, anything in its infancy cannot be all that helpful. And sure enough, on that day, 6 weeks after leaving here, standing in front of that first jury, there's only one thought that shot through my brain: fear. Complete, total, all-consuming fear. And it was at that moment I realized something about being a lawyer. It's an understanding that was really never explained in law school. Now, I've never cared for lawyer jokes. It's not that I'm sensitive or have a glass jaw or take things seriously. It's just that I don't like them. It's easy to make fun of lawyers. It really is. We do a lot of damage to ourselves, and we make for an easy target of ridicule sometimes. There's a story I used in one of my novels. It's my fictional president of the United States, Danny Daniels, and he remembers when he was a boy, and a friend of his told their teacher how he and his father went fishing and they caught a 65-pound bass in 1 hour. Now, the teacher was no idiot and said that was impossible. So to teach Danny's buddy a lesson about lying, the teacher told the boy of how a bear came from the woods and attacked her, but was fended off by a tiny hound with just a bark. You believe that? The teacher asked. Sure, Danny's pal said, because that was my dog. Yeah. That's what a lawyer is. Symbolically, we're the client's dog. That tiny creature who can fend off a big bear with just a bark. We're the one the client chooses to take into battle with them, the one they place their trust into, the one they're depending on to walk side by side with them through whatever troubles await them. And most important, just like Danny's friend, the one they take pride in. And that's the lesson I learned that day, amidst all that fear, standing in front of that first jury. My client's future depended on what I was about to do. She'd placed an important part of her life in my hands. Do it right, things could go okay. Mess it up, and it's all my fault. She had no idea what to do. That's why I was there. I was her lawyer. Now, luckily for me, things went pretty good that first time, but I never forgot their lesson. Now, there's a downside. Lots of sleepless nights, a level of worry that can rise to monumental proportions. And then there's that occasional failure, even when you've done everything right, that will haunt you for years to come. I still think of mine even now, years after the fact. You can't really help it. It's an occupational hazard. But it's a good one because it'll keep you sharp. There's a scene in Tom Wolfe's The Right Stuff. One of the Mercury astronauts is strapped atop a rocket and is about going to space. Now, these things have been blowing up every time they've been sending them up, and there's every reason to think that this one's going to blow up too. But he's ready to go. And only one thought's going through his mind, and it's not, please let me live, or don't let this rocket blow up, or I don't want to die. Nope, the only thing he's thinking at that moment is, don't let me mess up. That's another lesson I learned that day, a lesson I wish I'd heard about a lot sooner. A lawyer's job is not to mess up. So that's two things I discovered fairly quickly after leaving here. Then came a third, and this one dawned on me about a year after graduation. And I've come to see that it actually applies to all lawyers, no matter what your practice may entail, no matter where it occurs. Nobody comes to see a lawyer unless they have a problem. Now, it could be a good problem, like adopting a child or buying a house, but usually, though, it's a bad problem. And they need help solving it. Now, they don't need ridicule or a lecture or a condescending attitude. They don't need someone too busy to listen or a personality too indifferent to care. And they also don't need an ally or an enabler or the bias of a parent or a sibling or a close friend. They need a lawyer. Someone who cares, someone who's on their side, someone who stays above the fray and uses their brain to solve the problem. Now, does that mean we're impassionate? No, absolutely not. Or ambivalent? Never. And here's something else no one mentioned 33 years ago. It's a lesson that crystallized to me just after I was first published as a novelist. My idol is the great thriller writer David Morrell. He's brilliant. He's forgotten more about writing than most writers will ever know. When my second book, The Romanoff Prophecy, was published, we sent it to David for a blurb, that catchy little quote you see on the fronts of all the covers. David read it, he liked it. He said he'd be happy to provide a blurb, but there was just one little thing. Apparently, he said, I've never fired a gun in my life. And actually, he was right. I never had fired a gun in my life. He noted that everything I had said about weapons in the story was wrong. So he proceeded to teach me how the words pistol and revolver, magazine clip, bullet and round were not interchangeable words. They're actually terms of art with specific meanings. Never mix them up. He was right, and I never did mix those up again. And there's a parallel to this in the practice of law. There's a difference between representing a client and defending a client. Now, those words are not interchangeable either. They are distinct, and each demands its own unique course of action. Both entail solving a client's problem. Both lead to results. But careful which one of those you choose, for each comes with its own assortments of challenges and regrets. There are many clients I represented but never defended. And then there were those that I defended because representing them would have been a disservice. How will you know when to take one route as opposed to the other? Only time can teach you that, unfortunately. For now, just know that the dichotomy exists. Representing, defending. It's a difficult choice, but it's one you're going to have to make on a daily basis. When I began the practice of law, the term civility was kind of rarely used back then. Today, you hear it all the time. In fact, there's a 1-hour requirement in your continuing legal education dealing with it every year. But in 1980, nobody really worried about the concept all that much. It was just simply expected. How else would you act? Just treat others as you would expect people to treat you, and it'll work out just fine. It sounds great, doesn't it? But unfortunately, it doesn't really work that way in the real world. You're going to encounter people who try your patience. No matter what you do, no matter how conciliatory you may be, nothing ever seems to work. Civility is foreign to them. But it's how you react that's the true test of civility. Lawyers who encountered me during my first decade of practice would probably say that I wasn't all that civil, and they'd be right. Thankfully, age and experience works wonders. We learn. For me, it came from the realizing that it wasn't my job to make life difficult. It was not my task to complicate an already complicated situation. Asking rather than demanding usually provides the desired results. And above all, we're all in this together. Both sides of the conflict, each doing their respective jobs, each trying to obtain the best result. And being an arrogant idiot adds nothing to the equation. Don't think for a moment that you won't be judged by clients, your employees, your fellow lawyers, judges, juries, and the public at large. Actually, you're going to be judged every second of every day. And how you conduct yourself will be a measure of what others think of you. I'd like to think that those same lawyers thought more kindly of me in the last 20 years of my practice than they did in the first 10. I practiced in a small community. There were about 15 of us. And we interacted all the time together. It was kind of like a sports league with 15 teams that play against each other all the time. And after a while, you get to know your opponent's strengths and weaknesses pretty well. You know the good and the bad. You know what to say and what not to say. And you know how to get things done and how to mess them up. There was one lawyer in our group that always struck me very strange. And after a while, I came to realize why. He just didn't mind losing. I faced this lawyer in court many times on all sorts of trials, both jury and non-jury. And he was interesting to watch, and sure now, he was always prepared. He said the right things. He conducted himself properly at all times. But losing the fight just never seemed to bother him. Now, that doesn't mean if you don't get everything you want, it's a loss. Victory is most times a compromise. And making the best deal possible for both sides can be a victory as well. Conflict resolution is nearly always negotiated. But then there are those times when negotiations just don't bear fruit, when arbitration is useless, when mediation is a waste of time. That's when two sides head to court and they place the ultimate decision in the hands of a judge or a jury. I did that literally thousands of times. And in that arena, there are going to be winners and losers. It's so clearly defined that you can actually keep score. Over the course of my trial career, I lost my share of those fights. Each one hurt, it still does. My friend, though, that other lawyer, he never really seemed to mind. Win or lose, he was the same. And so finally I asked him about it one time, and he did not deny the attitude. He said he was actually proud of it. He said, I never ever take the client's fight personal. I just show up, do my job, go home, forget it. But what about losing, I asked him. He just shrugged and said, doesn't matter. But it does. I came to learn real quick after leaving here that winning does matter. Having a desire to win matters. Caring about winning matters. Wanting a particular result is not a bad thing. That doesn't mean that winning is everything now, or if you win at all cost, or if you lose, the world ends. It's just that caring about winning matters. It's like playing poker with someone else's money. If you're betting with the other guy's chips, it's so much easier, isn't it? It's so much more difficult when you bet with your own money because you're more careful, you're more thoughtful, you're more prepared. There's a different attitude, a different sense, a different feeling about it. And that was the thing about my friend. He always bet with the other guy's chips and rarely ever won. Nobody in law school really ever talked to me about winning, but in the practice of law, I'd be lying to you if I said that it didn't matter. So let's recap where we are. A lawyer is the client's warrior, one that the client wants to be proud of, there to walk the client through their troubles and solve their problems. We have to be both passionate and impassionate, knowing where that line is drawn, always ready, trying our best never to mess up. We have to care about winning because to not to do so makes us careless and indifferent. And if we never forget, and we should never forget that deceit, rudeness, and arrogance foster only failure. And then there's that thing about representing and defending. No easy answer there on that one, but trust me, you're going to figure that one out. It sounds kind of easy when you say it in just one paragraph, and actually it's not as difficult to do all that as you might imagine. It's like writing novels. There are thousands of us who do it, but no two are alike. Each has their own style, developed from years of hard work, honed by their own individual personalities and backgrounds. No one writer is better than the other. We're just all different. I write a series with a recurring hero. He's named Cott Malone. He's a retired Justice Department lawyer. He lives in Copenhagen. He runs an old bookshop, and he stays in trouble all the time. And there are 8 novels in that series so far, and hopefully there'll be some more coming in the years ahead. And any writer who develops a series learns that the key to success with each one of these books is they have to be the same but different. Now that's a tall order, but it can be done. And that's really what each one of you are. You're all the same, but you're different. And that brings me to the last thing that I learned after leaving here. Something that I never recalled really being mentioned either in so many words. Being a lawyer is special. It truly is. And if you want proof, look at history. In the first half of the 20th century, when millions of Hindus longed for a leader, it was a young lawyer, Mahatma Gandhi, who showed them independence. He did that without ever turning to violence, using his brain and patience to defeat a mighty British Empire. In the 1950s and 60s, when segregation was the law of this land, when separate but equal was actually thought to be equal, it was a cadre of lawyers from the NAACP, men like Thurgood Marshall, George Hayes, and James Naisbitt, who took the fight to the courts and proved that under our Constitution, separate can never, ever be equal. In the latter part of the 20th century, apartheid was the way of South Africa. Anyone who challenged that long-standing principle was met with prison or death. But one man did challenge it. He served 27 years in jail, all the while becoming a ramrod for the dismantling of an evil system. Eventually, that lawyer, Nelson Mandela, was freed and ultimately became the first black South African to be elected in a fully representational, multiracial election, quite literally changing history. On the night of March 5, 1770, at the height of tensions between the American colonies and England, a group of British Army soldiers fired without orders into a crowd and killed 5 Massachusetts colonists. It became known as the Boston Massacre. 8 soldiers were arrested and charged with murder. To say the least, the people of Massachusetts were interested only in revenge. But a colonial lawyer, John Adams, sought justice. He decided that those soldiers did not need representing. Instead, they needed to be defended. And that's what he did, arguing self-defense and provocation with such elegance that a jury of colonists acquitted 6 of them, and the other 2 were only convicted on a lesser charge. In 1215, when a king's word was absolute, subject not to debate, men trained in the law drew a document, one that altered such arbitrariness and provided for the rights of men outside of divine rule. They called it Magna Carta. And though much of that grand concept was ultimately ignored, one principle, that no free man could be punished except through the law of the land, survived and still exists today. Not as some abstract concept or meaningless phrase, but as part of the very foundation of Western civilization. At every juncture in human history, lawyers have been present. That is fact. And they were not there to obstruct or to prevent anything. Instead, they served as catalysts for change, using their minds for weapons and their words as tools. Today, each of you will join their ranks. It is a weighty legacy, for sure, but every army requires fresh recruits. Your task has been defined by those who came before you. Your predecessors laid out the rules and drew the out-of-bounds markers. Many of those lawyers risked everything, including their lives, to prove their point. It's no coincidence that 35 of the founding fathers possess legal training, that every treaty between nations you can name was drafted by lawyers, that all of the major pieces of litigations that have altered our society in significant ways, like the Civil Rights Acts, the Voting Rights Acts, the Fair Housing Act, were composed by lawyers. At a moment when this nation teetered on the brink of total dissolution, when secession dominated and the United States crumbled into civil war, it was a lawyer, Abraham Lincoln, who saved it. And that's what I mean when I say that being a lawyer is special. Welcome to the club. You're now honored members. Be conscious of that past, mindful of its lessons and responsibilities, for everything you do from this day forward reflects on all those who came before you. Here today, your family, your friends, your professors, your classmates all watch with pride in their eyes. And you might think that the journey's over. Law school's ended. I graduated. It's done. But I assure you, your journey has just begun.